Now let's turn our attention to boxing, shall we? The all-British clash between #1 and #2 world-ranked light heavyweights Joshua Buatsi and Dan Azeez was postponed earlier this week after Azeez suffered an injury in his final training session. Of course, the fight was due to be live on talkSPORT on Saturday evening. Let's speak to a man who knows more about that than anyone on the planet. The CEO of Boxer, our mate Ben Shalom, joins us. Hello, Ben. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, guys. How are you doing?
We're good. Thank you so much for coming on. Always a pleasure to speak to you. So I suppose the obvious question is, what actually happened to Dan Azeez?
Oh, it's been horrible. You know, we've had few events cancelled this year with an injury, but never did I expect this one. I've promoted Dan Azeez for a couple of years now, 2-3 years. So for this to happen from him, who's never pulled out of any fight, who's worked his way up to this position from small hall shows to fighting at the O2 in the biggest fight of his career, the ultimate professional. And I couldn't quite really believe it. We announced a big US deal on Monday, and then to receive that call that evening, it was horrible. I thought it was some sort of joke. It clearly wasn't. And the good thing is we'll be able to postpone the fight and we move on. But it was a difficult one to take.
I know Benny's going to talk to you about when that rematch happened, so we'll get to that in just a sec. But I'm just curious, when did you find out that he actually injured his back, and how did he do it, Ben?
So I received a call at 5:30 on Monday from his manager, who I know well, and I thought he's on the wind-up. I know him well. I thought it took me about 10 minutes to realise that he was telling the truth, and we got Dan in front of the doctor straight away. I had him arguing with the doctors. I had him distressed. You know, this is something people don't realise, the amount of work that goes in. And this is something that he's worked his whole life towards. And yeah, it was something that he picked up in his final session. And I don't want to, it's for him to say exactly what his injury is in his back, but he couldn't even walk. He couldn't even come into the studio. He can't even touch. And so he'd have got in. He's the type of fighter, and anyone that knows Dan Azeez is the type of fighter that gets in with injuries. He's been in a fight with me where he's got in with a broken rib. Wow. He's been in fights where he's come in with strains and everything. This was a case of literally not being able to stand up straight.
How did he do it, Ben?
I think it was in his final sparring session or his final training session. Something's gone. He's gone. He didn't need to do any more training, so he spent a day trying to rest it, felt better, and then it's just locked up, and to the point where, as I say, he cannot stand up, and he couldn't touch his knees. It was just, we were looking at all sorts, and he was looking at all sorts, whether pain relief, pain injections, but it got to the point where, regardless of that, he wouldn't have been able to move. He wouldn't have been able to do anything, and he'd have been a sitting duck. And the health and safety in that situation has to come first. And it's devastating for him. Just to say as well, it's absolutely devastating for Joshua Buatsi as well, who's put himself through a very, very grueling camp as well. And just all round for both fighters, there's no one more disappointed than me. But my heart goes out to the fighters and the fans and British boxing, because it's one of the biggest fights in the year. So to see it postponed was heartbreaking, to be honest.
So Ben, when will then the actual boxing match take place? And is there a date scheduled? Have you got any time frame on the injury? When do you think?
Both fighters are trying to commit to doing this year. Obviously, we don't want to announce the exact date without getting absolute clarity on Dan's recovery. But I expect it to be very, very soon, and that's why tickets will be carried over, and hopefully we can announce that literally within the next 7 to 10 days.
Okay. How did Joshua Buatsi react to the news? Was it you that told him about the postponement?
I told his manager, and we've spoken on the phone. I was actually with him last night, and I've never seen someone more distraught. I mean, it was the people, as I say, this isn't like a sport like other sports. There are moments in people's career that they work towards their whole life, and that's what Saturday night represented for both of them. I think he's comforted in the fact that he knows Dan Azeez personally. He knows what a guy is, and he knows that that it must be very, very serious for him to not be getting in on Saturday night. And he's comforted by the fact that the fight will happen, and by the fact that there's so much interest. I think the devastation that is felt around British boxing right now, that this fight isn't going ahead, shows what a big fight it is.
Ben, I want to play some audio and get your view on the back of it. Following the news that the fight had been postponed, the Matchroom chairman, Eddie Hearn, he joined us on Drive a few days ago, 12 days ago, Eddie said in an interview that he'd heard the fight wasn't going to go ahead. So I asked him how he knew. Have a listen to his answer.
I don't know about any injury. You just, you know, in boxing, you hear a lot of stuff, Andy. Some stuff that's true, some that's not. But, you know, I was asked about it and I heard that, you know, the event wasn't, this is just what I heard, wasn't going particularly well and it was unlikely to take place. Whether that was true or not, and he ended up getting an injury. It's very strange to get an injury on the Tuesday of fight week. It's a shame because it was a good fight.
What do you make of Eddie's comments, Ben?
To be honest, I think it's very damaging. I think it's nonsensical. When you have one of the biggest fights in British boxing, one, to talk it down like that, and then two, to question one of our country's and boxing's most revered athletes and someone that is respected throughout the industry. I don't believe it deserves a response, but I'm also conscious of how damaging those sort of comments can be to an athlete, to the sport. The fight will go ahead. It has been postponed. It is clearly one of the biggest fights in British boxing, and it's devastating for us. But it's nonsensical what's being said.
Ben, was there any indication at all before he actually pulled up with the injury that there was anything there at all?
Absolutely not. I mean, we announced, we had the gloves are off on Sunday night that went out to millions of people. We had the NBC announcement, which is a huge, huge American deal that we've just done as a business. This was their first fight. That was announced on Monday. We were promoting it across Arsenal, Chelsea. That happens on Saturday on NBC as well. Imagine what happens when we announce a big deal like that, and the next day, you know, we're having to pull the show. And so it's as I say, it's nonsensical. It's hurtful, especially I know to Dan and the fighters. But the reality is the fight will go ahead and it will be one of the biggest fights in the sport this year.
Ben, let me ask you, when you hear a comment like that from someone like Eddie Hearn, after you get off the phone to us, what do you do? Do you then phone him or text him, or do you speak to his people? Do you let it go? What will you do with something like that?
No, look, I think I've learned the past year or so that it's best not to respond. And I think I understand the games and I understand the politics and I understand hoping for me to respond and there to be back and forth. But in this occasion, it's not helpful. It's not helpful to the sport and it's not helpful to the fighters. And I don't think there's anything more to be said.
But let me ask, as a boxing fan, I am very, very excited about this fight, and we've been talking about it for a long, long time. It's very rare you get the number 1 and 2 in the world go head-to-head, and I think without doubt the right decision has been made, because as a boxing fan, we only want to see them both getting into the ring, both at 100%. So
look, we saw it with Liam Smith against Chris Eubank Jr.
Yeah.
He clearly wasn't 100%, but this wasn't even being 100%. Liam Smith was able to stand up.
Yeah.
You know, this is you can't have someone go in who's worked his whole career and be annihilated because he's struggling to stay on his 2 feet. And we want to see the best fight the best. We want to see the biggest fights in this sport. This is one of the biggest fights that we can make.
And listen, the way I see it as well, you could have easily waited till maybe Thursday or Friday to make the decision, but then you annoy boxing fans because it's late. I think you've made it as soon as you knew about it. The fight's going to happen. No one loses their money. As you said, the tickets are going to be okay for when the fight happens, hopefully before the end of the year. So as a boxing fan, I think without doubt you've made the right decision as soon as you knew. So
I do want to say as well, I'm extremely proud of Boxer and Sky. They've managed to keep on the event. It now goes to a huge event at the York Hall with the British title between Lawal Chamberlain with Gilly against Green, which everyone's looking forward to, both coming off 3 out of 4 knockouts. Karis Artistor from the Olympics, the bronze medalist, in her big step up, and Joe Laws fights Mick Hennessy's son, Michael Hennessy Jr. in what is promises to be an absolute war. So it's going to be a huge event this Saturday in the cauldron that is York Hall. They've done so well to keep it on. It's great for British boxing that it stays on, and it's great that Azeez Buatsi will also happen. Yeah,
well, listen, well done to you on behalf of all boxing fans. We want to see Buatsi against Azeez, but we only want to see them when they're both 100% fit, so it will happen. It will be an absolute blockbuster, and I'm hoping it will happen before the end of the year. So I personally think, Ben, you've made the right call, so well done to you and your gang for that. And again, thank you so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure. It sounds very loud. Are you in a Pizza Express?
I'm not in a Pizza Express, but you're not far off.
Okay.
You're not far.
Pizza Hut.
I hope you've not got pineapples on that pizza. You're a disgrace if you have, Ben. Listen, again, I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy boy, so all of us here at Drive and talkSPORT appreciate your time. Thanks, Ben, for that.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ben. There you go, the wonderful Ben Shalom. I know I sort of harped on about it at the end, but I think there have been so many fights, Benny, previously that they've put the fight on when maybe one of the two boxers haven't been 100% fit. This is such a massive, massive fight. Number 1 and 2 in the world. Yeah. I mean, it'll be an absolute barnstorm blockbuster when they
want both 100%.
Of course you do.
Like tearing lumps out of each other.
Yeah, and what could easily happen? He could have said to Dan Azeez, listen, wait till Thursday, see what we're like. Right? Yeah. Maybe it's better. But then you get the public on your back. It's like, why didn't you tell us when you knew?
But I think he made a good point about the Liam Smith fight, because that rematch against Chris Eubank Jr. was... he couldn't do anything, could he?
Yeah.
Couldn't do anything.
I agree.
talkSPORT Drive. Super opinionated sporting debate. Monday to Friday afternoon from 4 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.